likely was just variance in actual work being found. But the aftermath of that event, even though it's just a totally random happenstance, the aftermath is still that you have this terrible backlog now of transactions, and you have a bunch of unsatisfied users, right? So one of the proposed solutions to this problem is the Lightning Network, which is great and really fancy. It provides scaling off-chain, so we don't need to bloat the blocks, but we can still get lots of transactions, and it provides very fast confirmation. Although it's not like a full proof of work confirmation, it is supported by game theory. But there are some drawbacks. So actually running a Lightning Network node is non-trivial. It's actually, even for pretty sophisticated people, there's still reports where people lose funds and such. That's not to say that it can't be solved, but it is an issue. There's another drawback which I've discussed a fair bit with some friends. Basically, where one of the ways that the smart contracts on Lightning Network work is they use check block time to make certain transactions that can't be published until a certain time. But there is a scenario where if you have a huge fee event right around the same time that you need to close your channels, now you might not be able to get your transactions into the next block. So having unpredictable confirmation times can actually ruin your channel on the back end, and then if that happens to a bunch of people, now everybody in the Lightning Network panics and races to close their channel, but there isn't enough block space for them to all be closed. And the other thing too about Lightning Network is, with all the advantages it can provide, it still works better if you have on-chain scaling as well, right? That's just X amount more channels that you can support. So on to the other camp, right? You have more naive scaling, just making the blocks bigger. This has a substantial drawback of miner centralization. So if you don't know, larger blocks have a higher orphan risk, which means that they might get, miners might follow a different chain. They might see a different block that popped out at the same time. And so this means that as blocks get larger, the miners either coalesce more into pools, or just the small miners basically go under and just sell their business. Also, drawback of larger blocks is, it's not a permanent scaling solution. You can't just keep doubling the blocks and assume it's going to be okay. I mean, with certain hardware advances, that's okay to an extent, but the network capacity isn't super likely to scale as well as we need. And the other drawback here too is zero conf is still not safe, even with Bitcoin, even with bigger blocks, because you still have the risk that a miner, is going to be bribed to basically bounce the zero conf from their transaction pool, and it's still a random arrival time. So into how Bitcoin NG actually works. It kind of turns the, welcome guys, you're just in time actually, because we went over the problems and existing stuff, and this is how Bitcoin NG works and solves those problems. So what NG does is it flips the sort of structure of the block on its head. Like the old block is, you have a small proof of work, and then you include a whole bunch of transactions, right? This model, you have just the proof of work. So these blue blocks, the large K, those are the proof of work blocks, and they don't include any transactions. They're simply there to basically they're there to award the Coinbase the reward for the miner, and they're there to select a new leader. And now for the rest of the time until a new proof of work block is found, that leader can sign in to the record microblocks, which include transactions. So those are like the circle blocks with the small k. So those each contain, a number of transactions or, a certain kilobyte size worth of transactions. And then, maybe that's every 10 seconds. Those are periodically created and basically just attached on, theoretically, like to the proof of work block. So what you end up with, you have, your proof of work, and then you have a bunch of microblocks after that, and that's comparable to the existing blocks that we have now, right? Except that it's smooth, right? So if you have 30 minutes go by and no proof of work is found, which happens pretty often, actually, you'll still have 30 minutes worth of transactions that are getting confirmed, right? Because the leader, assuming that the leader is still online, right? And they're still getting transactions, they're just gonna keep signing until the new proof of work kicks them out. So that's great for, like with this variance episode that happened back in September, where there was over an hour without any proof of work found. So if we had this system, that whole hour, you're still finding transactions, signing transactions into the record, and you don't have like a sudden fee event. Oh, I was hitting the rewind button. I was like, my slides are messed up. Going the wrong way. Oh yes, so if we want to scale the effective block size, basically we have two parameters here. The shown on the graph here is 10 seconds between microblocks, and then you have another parameter which basically determines the size of that microblock. So your effective block size is just a function of those two, and you can either compact the space between microblocks, or you can make the microblocks a little bigger, and then you can scale your block size. And because the proof of work blocks are small, you don't have the increased orphan risk, so you hopefully don't have as much like contention in the community as to actually doing the scaling. So, incentive-wise, a lot of the game theory stuff carries over from Bitcoin in a similar way, but the big difference is how the transaction fees get split up. So the 40% of the fees go to the leader that signed the microblock, and then the remainder goes to the miner that found the next block that basically adds the confirmation onto those transactions. So, the incentives here are pretty straightforward. Like, the original miner has incentive to sign transactions and create microblocks, and the next miners are still encouraged to work. They're encouraged not to work on just the proof of work block, but include as many microblocks in their new block as possible. So, benefits, right? We have very predictable fee market. We have predictable confirmation times. You actually get, instead of just having a zero confirmation transactions, you have, it's actually much more than zero conf. It's still not a full proof of work conf, and you still wouldn't want to use it for large transactions. But there are still game theory incentives that once you get a micro confirmation on one of these 10-second blocks, it's very likely to be included and probably good enough for almost every brick and mortar application. So, no drawbacks, we just have more benefits on this slide. Thank you for the laugh. Right, so the more benefits is kind of that we can do Bitcoin NG and we can do like Bitcoin Cash and we can do Lightning Network. So we do Bitcoin NG, we make the blocks bigger, and we do Lightning Network on top of it. It just, Lightning Network works even better with more reliable confirmations. Lastly, there are actually quite a few projects out there that already use the NG architecture. Eternity and Waves, two of the biggest ones that are currently using it, and as far as I know, they haven't had any problems with it so far. So, how would we actually deploy this for Bitcoin? I think we'd probably want to target one of the similar coins that's smaller, like Litecoin or Doge, or maybe Bitcoin Cash. That way we're working with a similar code base to Bitcoin, but it doesn't have, it's like a test bed. But ultimately, I think we would want to try and deploy a fork on main chain Bitcoin, which ideally we would have consensus for. It is theoretically possible to do it in a way that is actually a soft fork, so we would only need 51%. It's a little trickier because the new blocks need a little bit of new information that don't exist in the existing protocol, but you can hack around it, and the benefits to having a soft fork versus a hard fork might be worth it, even if it's a little dirtier. This is the team of guys that are on the NG project. I don't work on it, I'm just a fan. I think that's, yeah. Anybody have questions? You got 30 seconds. Yes, Sean?
Why is the fee split 40-60? Is that an incentive mechanism? Why not 50-50 or something?
The exact numbers, there was a formula in the white paper that explained how they came up with the exact numbers and the rationale for that. We can look at it afterwards.
Sounds like a plan. Thank you.
Yes?
But if you are a substantial leader, I think you have the opportunity to grab both of those fees on both sides.
So if you're the K1 miner, like there's a chance that you're gonna find 2 consecutive blocks.
Right.
And you will end up with 100% of the fees in that case, yeah.
But those blocks can always be different sizes, right, based on volume?
So like the big K, the blue blocks, those are always just proof of work. They don't have transit. And then basically the small ones, it's like how many of those are you including until the next proof of work finds, yeah. Cool.
What do you think about Bitcoin Cash?
In 5 seconds, please.
Thank you.